I've been thinking about stained glass lately. I learned from a museum that the stained glass in old churches and cathedrals was intended to be a primary source for people to learn stories from the Bible, because so many people couldn't read. They were illiterate. So they would go to church, hear from the priest, which may have been in Latin, a language they didn't speak anyway, and then see these huge, gorgeous panes of colored glass. Panes that you couldn't not notice or look at. And then, from this glass, supposedly, they'd learn the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, or the story of David and Goliath, or the story of baby Jesus in the manger. But when I look at an old sheet of stained glass, of course I can see the characters and animals there, but I can't see the stories unless I actually read or hear a description of what's going on first. It's like the people that lived back in the 14th and 15th centuries, though they may have not been writing literate, were more visually literate than many of us are today. I'm Nathaniel Bozarth, and this is Wide Ruled, Brain Roots podcast on the past and present of equality in education. For those of you who are regular listeners, I want to acknowledge that we've been totally inconsistent with cranking out new episodes. It's all on me. Life has just been a little bit crazy lately. Which brings me to the important point that you can support Wide Ruled by becoming a patron on Patreon. Find us at patreon.com/wideruledpodcast. There, you can donate as little as $1 per episode to keep Wide Ruled going. On today's episode, we're talking about visual literacy, particularly through the work of the Thinking Through Art program at the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art. In this podcast, you'll hear from Louisa Hartigan and Rosie Reardon. Rosie has since moved on from working at the museum. Here's Louisa first.
Thinking Through Art is our school partnership program. The core of the program is based around VTS, which is Visual Thinking Strategies. It's a method for looking at and discussing art. And that started around 30 years ago with the director of the education department at MoMA, Philip Yenowin, and a cognitive psychologist named Abigail Housen.
Yenowin and Housen collaborated for 2 decades to develop the foundational visual thinking strategies methodology. Through thousands of meticulously executed interviews, Housen had discovered that across cultures, learning abilities, and age, humans follow a uniform progression in the way they think about and analyze images over time. That is, when given the task of describing and articulating what is going on in an image, people improve in their ability to do so with each subsequent task. That makes plenty of sense. But what's interesting is that humans across a variety of differences improve uniformly in a trajectory which Housen broke out into 5 stages. You can read about those stages in the show notes at brainroot.tv/wideruledpodcast. But here's what's most important to understand about the stages. Together, Yenowin and Housen discovered that not only did people develop what Yenowin called visual literacy, but they also improved in other related skills, like the ability to think critically.
It's something that we're bringing into Title I schools, and we do like a 15-minute VTS conversation with the kids. We bring an image from the museum, so they're kind of getting to know our collection, and they're building this connection with the museum, and then they do a 15-minute writing activity. And it's completely staffed by museum staff, but mostly by those docents and volunteers. So it's also just this great community outreach that, and those individuals become part of the school community too.
Third graders, your voices should be up.
I don't think you can tell what that is. All right, you guys, we're going to take just a quiet moment to kind of look at this image before we talk about it here. And again, we're going to kind of think about what we are seeing, and then we're going to be giving evidence as to what our statements are about what we see in this piece. So think about that as you look at the image.
My students, what's that?
Kids learn in such different ways.
This is Rosie Reardon, former head of school and educator services at the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art.
Like, this is providing techniques that are totally different and allows kids to be successful in ways that, like we've had students say, I am not successful anywhere else, but I can be successful with this. Like, you're building success for them, and that makes everybody feel good.
The whole idea is that art is kind of this this neutral ground to talk about ideas. There's no right or wrong answer, so any answer that a kid provides is validated and accepted. So it's kind of this really safe environment for them to practice critical thinking skills, and they really grow in their ability to kind of express their ideas and also to back up their ideas with evidence, which is a huge part of the Common Core. So teachers love seeing that. And then kind of the conversational skills too, being able to agree to disagree with your classmates, like listening carefully, building on each other's ideas, all of that.
Okay, all eyes should be on the image right now. What is going on with this picture? And look at all these volunteers. I'll start with you. Maddie.
It looks like there are butterflies.
Speak up, my friend, I can hear you.
Girl.
So Maddie is noticing surrounding the girl. It looks like there is an image of a butterfly. What do you see that makes you say this is a these are butterflies?
Because it has the shape that a butterfly would usually look like.
Okay. So Maddie has noticed that the shape of this object.
What is visual literacy?
So, when you read a text, there are words there.
Hey, sorry about the rustling noise here during Rosie's answer. I always strive to bring you great audio quality, but I still hadn't quite mastered the art of lapel mic placement when I did this interview, so you'll hear her microphone rubbing up on her collar.
And the skills that are required for reading are decoding words. And a lot of times, if I'm a struggling reader, it takes me so much time and energy to decode words that by the time I finished, I am not having any kind of comprehension of what I've just read because I spent 15 minutes trying to figure out what this sentence says. With visual literacy, you're responding to a visual image. So you're looking at that image and you're still pulling out the pieces apart, like what's going on in this image. And then a kid will say, well, I think that the woman in this picture is really sad. So you're looking at the expression or you're looking at something about the figure and thinking that there's a sadness there. What do you see that makes you say that? And they might say, she has her hand covering her face or her eyes are cast down or it looks like she's been crying. So they're supporting what they're seeing. They're looking at something and they're supporting with evidence. That's what they have to do when they read. They have to support, what did you read that made you say that? And eventually you can translate articulating, looking at an image to looking at like you can project a passage and say, so what's going on in this passage? And they state the evidence.
So visual literacy is a skill that translates into other parts of the brain. It transfers to other skills. In the early 20th century, whether skills were transferable from one task to another was a wildly hot topic in education. One that fueled a debate about whether a liberal education or job-specific training were more apropos for our kids. At that time, psychologist and education reformer Edward Thorndike reported from his research that learning one skill did not help students with related skills later in life. Thorndike's research was contested by his contemporaries. Then, when his research was reviewed after his death, historians showed that he had grossly misinterpreted data from poorly designed experiments. As vocation-specific training comes back into vogue, it is critical that we remember that transfer of knowledge does in fact occur in the classroom. And here's why I take a moment to say this emphatically. Historically, vocational training has gone hand in hand with tracking, where people recommended for blue-collar vocational training are disproportionately people of color and from low-income backgrounds, and people recommended for college track disproportionately are middle and upper class and white. A disbelief in transfer of knowledge, like Thorndike's, has been used as supporting evidence for a mechanism that perpetuates systemic inequality. In the particular case of visual thinking strategies, the data shows that learning to analyze a visual image Visual literacy does much more than help kids become future art critics. It helps them to think critically. It increases their ability to sustain attention on one thing, and it teaches them civil discourse.
I think just also adding on to that, that's a similar idea is just this idea that literacy is not just being able to read and write anymore, it's broader. And so visual literacy comes into play with that, but it's also just kind of understanding how to use technology, understanding all the media that's around us, and visual literacy and being able to understand images and decode them and kind of look beyond the surface and look deeper and longer and come up with associations and make connections and draw conclusions from what you're seeing. That's all really important, and it's something that I don't think kids always know how to do. They're just absorbing so much media, but they don't necessarily analyze it and critique it. And so it's kind of they're starting to do that at a really young age with thinking through art.
We live in a visual culture where kids are bombarded by visual images all the time, and yet they don't really see anything. You ask them, what did you just see? And they can't tell you. They can't articulate anything. This is a conversation that takes 15 minutes. So imagine sitting with a group of kids and you're talking about an image for 15 minutes. Like that's you're building that sustainable, I can look and continue to find more, because the third question is what more can we find? So to continue to look, like there's still more that we can unpack. And when they start off, they typically make lists. I see a dog, I see a cat, I see a girl, I see a boy, I see a blue dress, I see a red balloon. That's typically where they start. But then as they go along, they start adding more, like they start building a narrative. And then they disconnect themselves, they kind of take themselves out of it, and they start thinking more about what the artist's intent was or what's the meaning behind
possibly
it.
From having the mask here, we cannot get our emotion. Okay, what more can we find?
That I think that she's in a play, and she's like the main character of the play, and she's dancing, and the butterflies are part of her costume.
Oh, okay, so now we've placed this as possibly being on a stage, and you're thinking that she is the main character in a play. And so what do you see that makes you think she might be on a stage? Okay, what more can we find, Miss?
Desiree, and I think it might be Halloween because she's dressed up.
Oh, okay, so Desiree is giving us another plot here for this character, stating that maybe this is Halloween, and that she's dressed up for her Halloween, in her Halloween costume. Okay.
One of the other outcomes of the Nelson-Atkins Thinking Through Art classes is that students learn to respectfully disagree in a low-stakes setting.
People don't know how to respectfully disagree. Like this teaches, like a principal made a comment to me, he said, I saw these two boys having a fight on the playground 30 minutes before they went in to have the VTS conversation, and now they're suddenly saying, I respectfully disagree with David, I respectfully disagree with Sam. Literally respectfully disagree. Like and he said, you guys were just, like he asked him afterwards, he goes, 30 minutes ago, you were punching each other out on the playground. We're in VTS. This is a respectful conversation. Like we can disagree, we have differences. And they're learning that I can have a difference, I can disagree with you. It doesn't change who I am or what I am. It doesn't change who you are, but to see things a little bit differently, like that's a huge skill.
Why is it that art is easier to facilitate civil discourse around than, say, an English class? Because literature is a form of art, right?
Right.
So why is it easier to do that around a piece of artwork?
The fact that you start the conversation with there's no right or wrong answer. Like in math, there's a right or wrong answer. 2 + 2 always equals 4, no matter what. In this, there's no right or wrong answer.
Okay. And so you're in agreement that it could possibly be Halloween night. So we've got a lot of different ideas here. Did you have something else that you wanted to add since you were so overly anxious?
Well, in the background at the bottom, I kind of see black lines.
Okay. All right. And there are black lines back here.
The teacher is not, she or he is not inserting their own opinion. So it's really this time when the kids, what they say is most important in the classroom. And, there are all these studies that kids, and especially in elementary school, don't really get that much chance to speak or to vocalize their ideas, or maybe they're just responding to specific pointed questions that a teacher has. So this is their chance to kind of, speak their mind, speak their opinion, again, in this safe environment that's where they know that the teacher is really listening to them. And the teacher is not only like hearing what they're saying, but they're understanding it enough and they're listening closely enough to kind of give it back to them in different words and to make sense of it in relation to what all the other kids said too. So, I mean, it's really like honoring the kid in this way that doesn't necessarily happen in other parts of the day.
So, you guys, this is really an amazing conversation. You guys came up with a lot of different thoughts and ideas on our character, but I want to go ahead and get to our lesson now because it's really fun as well. Thank you all for your great contributions.
That was great.
And it really builds a system of trust with them. Like they trust that you are going to respect what they have to say and you're going to build on it. And an example of that is we had a young man who didn't speak the entire school year. Last day we were in the class, we were doing a VTS discussion, and he was a child who had many problems. And he didn't raise his hand, he just said, "I have something to say." So I said, "Okay, Robert," that was his name. "What's going on in this picture?" And he said something. And, the kids were like, "Wow, I didn't even see that. I didn't even notice that." Like you heard kids commenting on what he had to say. And he was so proud of himself. And then another little boy who was really low on the autism spectrum said, "Well, I have something to say, but I don't know if it's right." And I said, "So what more can we find?" And he spoke, and the kids were like, "Wow, that was really great." The teacher's in the back of the room. She was in tears because here are these two kids who hadn't spoken. One was a lot of behavior problems. The other one just didn't ever feel comfortable. And they felt safe enough to say, she's going to honor what I say, and I have something that's important that I haven't spoken. And they did.
In so many words, that's what it's all about. The Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art is located in Kansas City, Missouri. Through the Thinking Through Art program, the museum provides visual thinking strategies curriculum to 6 elementary schools and 1 middle school. Combined, over 1,000 students are served in a total of 49 classrooms. The schools are located in Kansas and Missouri. All schools are Title I. In case you're not certain what that means, Title I schools have a minimum of 40% of students from low-income families, as outlined in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. The classroom conversations you heard throughout the episode took place at Shawano Elementary, the discussion facilitated by museum docent Joni Bergman. You can support Wide Ruled by giving as much as $3,000 per episode on patreon.com/wideruledpodcast. We don't expect you to give that much, though. Wide Ruled is produced by myself, along with Christopher Cook, who wants to encourage you to keep up the good fight. And I would like to encourage you to share this episode with all your friends and by word of mouth. Thanks for listening.